Welcome to Spaghetti on the Wall, where we throw ideas, see what sticks, and nurture those that do. I'm your host, Armando Leduc, an actor, entrepreneur, and coach, giving you insights that light up your world. We're here to explore the realms of business, marketing, and life, serving up a shot of inspiration with every episode. Ready to make ideas stick and grow them into something great? Let's dive in.
All right.
Hey.
Hello.
I totally cut y'all off. I'm sorry about that.
You jerk. How could
But anyway, I appreciate everybody being here for another Spaghetti on the Wall. As I told you guys before, we are changing the format of this show because I really wanted to. I have people in my mastermind that are asking about, okay, how is it that we use our system to grow a business, and how are we using podcasts specifically? And I was like, all right, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to specifically talk about this entire process with you guys. And so we're just going to kind of roll it out as we go. And Gideon and Adrian have been involved for a long time. Adrian is one of my podcast hosts. Gideon is helping me write my book, author. And so we're gonna come together and we're gonna
done some content writing for you in the past as well.
Yes. So we're gonna keep rolling about how to monetize your podcast. Now, I want you guys to change your paradigm when it comes to podcasting in general and how we're actually using it. Because I know a lot of podcast hosts out there are still using it for entertainment purposes, and that's great, and you should continue doing that. However, what we're using it for is a way to create relationships and grow our business. And we've been doing that for the last 4 years, and it works extremely well. Why? Because most people, when you're talking about, and we're talking about specifically sales here, when you're doing sales, Gideon, every single sales approach that you've been a part of, what's the first thing that you have to do when in any sales process?
Build rapport.
Build rapport.
Yep.
Right? And everybody talks about, oh, let's build rapport. Let's build rapport. And how do we usually do it?
Icebreakers. Sometimes it's small talk. Sometimes it is, I would say the best bet is finding common ground. So as you're talking to a potential client or customer, they're going to start opening up about needs, wants. They might complain about something that happened this weekend or something they saw on the news, and you just roll with it. You know, listen and be willing to engage.
But here's the deal. If I don't know you, Gideon, right? I don't know you from Adam. Maybe you found me on social media. Maybe you were referred to me.
Right.
We don't know anything about each other, right? We get on the phone, and then I'm expecting you to tell me all of your problems. How open are you going to be with me if you don't know who I am?
Not terribly.
Not terribly, right? And then what's going to happen? I'm going to go, hey, Gideon, tell me about a little bit about yourself. Oh, you're from New Orleans? Are you a Saints fan? Huh, Gideon? Are you a Saints fan?
Oh, yeah. Who dat?
That's awesome. Great. Now let me tell you about what I'm going to offer you, right? Like, how much rapport are we spending? We're spending less than 5 minutes, right? And it feels like just a forced thing, right? Like we're just forcing it. Like, oh, I got to get to know you because you need to know, like me, and trust me in order for me to sell.
So that's the problem, though, is that is so I would call that tell rapport building versus listen rapport building. So it's I'm going to ask you some very generic questions to try to like get you to talk about these things I want to talk about. I've used stuff as simple as, you know, what were you up to this weekend? You know, how was your weekend, or how's your day going so far? And you know, and I learn a lot very quickly from that question. So how's your day going so far? Oh, it freaking sucks, man. This thing happened and this thing happened. I'm like, oh, that sounds rough. You know, and I'll just let them talk. Or they're like, my day's going, what do you need? And then I know, okay, this is a very different conversation. You know, I need to get straight to the point. And so, you know, again, a simple question of like, how's your day going so far? Their response to that will let me know what kind of person I'm dealing with immediately. And now I can kind of maneuver around that.
Now, what if I change the paradigm completely?
Okay.
And I say, hey, Gideon, instead of me trying to do a sales call first with you, I'm going to get to know who Gideon is. First and foremost, I'm going to say, hey, Gideon, I'm not going to sell you anything. I just want to know who you are, right? Because before we even get into a sales conversation, and I don't like to call them sales conversations, I like to call them help conversations. Because if you're in business, you're in business to help. You're in business to solve problems. So goes back to that, sell me a pen. Be like, do you need a pen? First and foremost, right? So, but before we even get into that conversation, I want to have a conversation with Gideon as a person. And I want to develop rapport with Gideon first and foremost, period. Like without any intention of selling, I just want to connect. And so now in our organization and in our system, every single time somebody has a referral for us, we put them into our podcast. Even if it's like a hot lead that's like, hey, this is coming straight from somebody, I will still put them on the podcast to connect with them before I even start a sales conversation. Number one, I'm doing it also for me, not just because I want to build rapport and sell something, but I also want to say, hey, do I want to deal with this person on a monthly basis? Like that's another thing. Like maybe we don't gel. There's some stories out there, right, of some people that have been on the podcast that as soon as even before we get on the podcast, they sent us this, 2-page, things to do on how to interview them. And immediately we're all like, okay, this isn't going to work, right? Like this person doesn't get it. And that's cool. Like I'm not putting a person down. We just know that person's not for us. So that's another weeding out process that we have to go, hey, this person's really cool. We totally would love to stay, would love to work with that person, or let's avoid this person.
Yeah, I think there's a comfort level that comes with experience. I think the problem is a lot of new people in sales and marketing or in business in general, they are so terrified to prune customers. And there's that 80-20 rule, where 80% of your money will come for 20% of your clients. There's an adverse to that, where 20% of your clients will eat up 80% of your time if you let them. And so, pruning clients is very important to long-term success, because if you're trying to chase every single client and trying to close every single client with just, dogged, I'm just going to hound them and hopefully they'll buy, you might as well just jump on the hamster wheel right then, because that's essentially what you're doing.
1,000%. I really want to talk about, and I want to tell a story real quick about how this all came into fruition and how I developed this system, because it's a really fun story. So 2019, this is right before COVID. I just had a baby and I was freaking out. Like I was freaking out. Mountains of debt. Was not really making much money with my production company. I think our highest year was $69,000 in revenue, right? Like that was the highest that it had ever been in 2019.
Okay.
And I'm sitting around, and then COVID hits, right? And then I'm freaking out even more. I'm like, okay, what's going to happen? At the time, I was running a band. Didn't know, didn't.
That's really a weird time to explain to people down the road.
And it was just so crazy, right? Yeah. And so I'm sitting there, and one of a really good friend of mine had a super successful business, right? Personal injury firm in Atlanta. And I said, Lewis, let's get on a call, right? Let's get on a Zoom, and let me just interview you, right? Let me just interview you on how you became successful. I actually found the video recently of that first interview. I never put it out. I need to put it out. But I just interviewed him, and we had conversations about how he was using operations and how he was using marketing to grow his law firm. And I was like, awesome. 2-3 months later, he calls me and it's like, hey, you should come shoot some content for me. I'm starting a new company. It's called 8-Figure Firm, and I'm teaching attorneys how to grow their businesses. And I was like, oh, that sounds awesome, right? So we end up getting into business together, right? Because I'm shooting his content. Then he refers me to all of these other law firms. We grow from about $69,000 a year in revenue to $500,000 in 1 year.
Wow.
Right?
It's a big jump.
Yeah.
It's a huge jump. All this to say is that you are one person away from $500,000 to 7 figures in revenue. And why do I say that? Because you don't know who that person could be that becomes a great referral partner for you, that ends up launching your business. So I didn't know it at the time, right? This was in 2020. I did not know this at the time. And so Lewis started mentoring me. I started going to the 8-Figure Firm masterminds. I started seeing how all of these businesses were growing their businesses. Now, they were all law firms. We were the only non-law firm, but business is business, right? We were still taking the same concepts and building our business. And Lewis was like, man, you got a 7-figure business. You just don't know how to get there. So I ended up getting mentored by him, started using the same tactics in terms of marketing. And he was like, Armando, if you're a video production company and you're not putting out content, what are you doing? And I said, yeah, you're right. So we started putting out content daily, started putting out like the short form content. And then I decided to launch this podcast, Spaghetti on the Wall. Right. And I was just like, I had just launched it just as a content creation vehicle. That's it. I was not using it the way I'm using it today, which is, I like to call it 4D chess, right? Because you're using it for content purposes. You're also using it for relationship building. You're also using it for authority building, thought leadership, the whole nine. And so I just started putting this podcast out, and I was like, I just want to make sure that this podcast is going out weekly. Well, what I did not realize is the confidence that it gave me as just a byproduct of doing this podcast on a weekly basis. So me speaking on camera and me speaking into a microphone and just being myself, it created this personal development aspect that I just did not even realize it was giving me, right?
Yeah.
Then
it happens in the background.
And then what happened?
Right.
A beautiful thing happened. I was like, okay, I'm going to start. I was inviting my friends. I was inviting, people that I've worked with in the past. Then I started inviting clients that were that were already working with us. And it was cool because then I was able to use that podcast as like a case study because they were giving me testimonials on the podcast. And I was like, oh, this is cool. Did not even realize that was going to turn into that. I was just like, I just wanted to interview them and get their opinion.
All right.
Then I started bringing in people that were leads that were in my pipeline that were just kind of sitting there. And I was like, hey, you know what? This would be a good way to just kind of get to know them. And all of a sudden, these people that were hot in my pipeline turned into clients. And I was like, whoa, hold on. What's going on here? Right? Like, what happened was I started building rapport. I started interviewing them, started spending some quality time together. All of a sudden, I'm closing business. Then I started bringing more referral partners in. Now, for 3.5 years, close to 4 years, which Spaghetti on the Wall is like past 200 episodes at this point.
Nice.
What happened was I still was a little all over the place in terms of who I brought on because it was Spaghetti on the Wall.
Yeah.
Right. And so I said, what if I dialed it in? Right. What if I've fought it for the longest, right? You got to niche down. Riches are in the niches. You hear it all the time, but I fought it. Then about 4 or 5 months, probably 5, almost 6 months ago now, I said, you know what? We're going to start a whole different podcast and we're strictly going to talk to attorneys. And we're strictly going to niche down to attorneys specifically. So if you're an attorney or if you're a legal vendor, these are the people that we're going to have on this podcast, right? And we call it Partnership for Profit. And then I said, oh, well, you know what? Armando is the bottleneck here because I can't handle all of the different podcasts. So I said, Adrian, who's right here, I said, Adrian, how would you like to be the host of this show? And he said, I would love to do that. Let's try it. Like a duck to water, right? Amazing. Like just
Thanks, man.
super. Yeah, he's really good at it, right? It just made sense.
He's got a good conversational way about him.
I try.
Super easy, right?
Very easy to talk to. Yeah.
And so we brought him on, and now we're just strictly talking to legal vendors and attorneys almost 10 times a week, right? We're gearing up to do 40 podcasts a month, right? That's the goal. As a result, we're closing deals left and right. Why? Because we're, number one, talking to our niche. Number two, we're building rapport, right? We're creating content for them. They understand what it is that we do. And then the sales conversation is such an easy conversation at that point. Because we're going, yeah, this is your problem. We can help solve it.
Yeah, I mean, you're doing a number of things at the same time with that. You're building your influence. You know, you are subject matter expert. People are seeing that you're a subject matter expert. You know, they're getting to talk to you. They're getting to see you. They're getting to experience that. You're building authenticity because we get to hear you talk. We get to see how you interact with people, and those people get to interact with you in real time. And then the third part of it, and there's more, but I'll stop at 3, is community building. Because you have been building a community, whether intentionally or unintentionally, for the last few years, of these people that now know you, are familiar with your work, are comfortable working with you, and want to work with you. And then that builds referrals, but that also starts connecting you like with people like Adrian, or the other people that now work for you, the people that have become part of your company and part of your masterminds, this community that you've been building at the same time.
100%. We have now over 300 people that have been to either Spaghetti on the Wall or Partnership for Profit that know us, that know what we do, that have left us 5-star reviews, that have worked with us in some capacity, that have sent us referrals, right? Like, and our network has grown so much that now if people are like, hey, I want to meet so-and-so, I can connect those people all day. And I'll in another podcast, we'll talk about our follow-up approach and our follow-up system, because like that has been the secret sauce. It's one thing to get people to the podcast and have a conversation with them, and I'm giving you guys the why on how that works. But when you guys start putting the nuts and bolts of how to actually do the follow-up process and how to actually transition someone from guest to client, or guest, more importantly, referral partner, that's the magic, right? Because you're opening up this door and you're formalizing this JV partnership, right? Because it's all networking anyway. It's all relationships. That's what business is.
Oh yeah.
So we're just speeding through the process. What did people do back in the day? I'm gonna invite you to a golf game. I might take lunch. You out for lunch, maybe drinks, know. With this, we're doing the same thing. We're
like dating.
And we're getting content at the same time.
Yeah.
I
win-win.
It's a win-win-win-win. It's like 4 win. Like that's why I call it 4D chess, because it's knocking out. And I already talked about the simple byproducts of when you create this podcast, what it does to you personally. Adrian, why don't you talk about your growth from day one to now and how you've grown as a person doing this podcast?
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny. I just looked, I just checked. Tomorrow will mark episode 75 of Partnerships for Profit. And it was one of those things that, when Armando first told me, hey, man, I think you're sitting in the wrong seat. I think we're going to move you out of the video editing department into doing the podcast hosting. And I'm going like, okay. And I was so nervous, and I was so that first one, and Armando's going like, well, you're gonna need a suit coat and you're gonna need to kind of strap up, get a haircut, buddy, get it right. And it was just one of those things that, like, that first episode, it's funny, I go back and I look at that first one and I'm going like, so okay, and I'm like looking down at the notes and I'm like, so you're a you're a lawyer.
What's that like?
Exactly. And so, it's one of those things that the more you do it and the more you get into it,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, the biggest roadblock is in your own head. And that's the biggest thing that being the podcast host has taught me, is that no matter what you do, no matter who you're speaking to, at the end of the day, it's just talking to people. Yeah. Whether you're selling something, whether you're hosting something, whether you're asking for something, it's just a person you're talking to. So, like, there's no need to be nervous about anything you're doing. And so, I mean, my confidence in speaking to people, I mean, Armando kind of put me on the spot answering this question. If he'd have done that, 3-4 months ago, I'd have been like, now I'm like, oh yeah, let me, I got an answer for that. Sure. Right. And it's really, really sort of been an evolution. And I think you can almost, over those past 75 episodes of Partnerships for Profit, go back and I mean, I have anyway, and I can see my growth throughout the episodes as just being more open, more conversational, more willing to, I think I was somebody too, that I was a little bit more of an introvert, that I put up this sort of shell that you had to get through. And there is nothing that will break down that shell faster than having to talk to a stranger, 2 strangers a day, Right. I mean, that is something, incredible. I mean, it's been great for me,
And there's 2 ways that you can learn something quickly. Is 1, by doing it just over and over and over again. 2, by teaching it to somebody else, because that's when your brain starts like Marmon is saying, 4D chessing things, like, oh, how does this? Oh, it does work this way. Okay. And so when you're interviewing people over and over again, you're doing both. Right. You're practicing it by doing it, but you're also having these conversations. And as you're responding to people, all these new processes start happening in your head, that you start understanding this. You start grasping the concepts and not repeating them, but like having these deep conversations about these concepts that you start learning more just by discussing it.
Well, and I didn't even think about that. You know what? Like, I wasn't even thinking about the fact that how amazing is it? And I know, because I've experienced it with Spaghetti on the Wall, but like being able to interview high level caliber people on like what they do, how they approach life, what is their mindset, like you just pick up so much information that you just naturally start to get better and start to get more knowledgeable. And all of a sudden you're pulling things from the depths of your mind that you didn't even know was in there, because you heard it from interviewing somebody.
Yeah.
Well, and that's one of the funny things too. I went to film school, and it's one of those things that, like, I hear people talk about the law now and I'm like, well, actually,
Oh man. So when I started in logistics years ago, I was an actor. I knew nothing about the logistics industry. Now I will talk to business owners and they'll misuse a term, or they'll talk about some piece of the truck or the machinery. And I'm like, I won't call them out. I'm like, I'm not familiar with that. Can you tell me more about it? And then they'll start describing it. And I'm like, is that a this or is that a that? And they're like, yeah. That's what I was referring to. Right. And I'm like, you didn't know the name of that thing. I don't say it, but I know. I'm like, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. Yeah. And to go from knowing nothing to that, but again, it had to happen through doing it over and over and over again.
Yeah. So here's the mistake that most business owners, and I'm talking to business owners here specifically, because I want to make sure that you guys are using this technique to grow your company. Not to say that if you're an artist, you can't do this, obviously use it. However, most people will not start a podcast because they're too afraid of the judgment. They're too afraid of putting themselves out there. They're paralyzed by all of the different things that could go wrong,
Right.
when you should be thinking about all of the things that could go right. And if your mindset shifts by doing, and is the only way you can change the mindset is through the actual doing of the thing. You cannot think your way out of it. You can't read your way out of it. You can't listen your way out of it. You have to go through it. And when you go through it and you experience it, and you embrace the suck at the beginning, and you embrace not knowing everything, and you embrace it just not going to turn out the way you want it to turn out. But if you can embrace it and you can go, you know what, I'm just going to work through it and I'm just going to move.
Yeah.
If you do that, you will figure it out. I've been listening to a lot of David Nagel lately. He's got an amazing podcast called the Success Mindset podcast.
Okay.
I believe that's that. Anyway, David Nagel, look him up.
All
but he really is just amazing. He was one of Bob Proctor's proteges. And just the mental trash that we feed ourselves on a daily basis as to why we can't do something. Right. And we will come up with excuse after excuse after excuse as to why we can't do something.
So I was just having a conversation yesterday with a marketer, and they were making fun of like the manifest people. Like, just think about this and you'll manifest it into the universe. And I'm like, okay, yes, that is a little woo. And if that's all you're doing, then yeah, it's not going to help. But if you are thinking, this is the thing I want, and you start looking at it, you try to put like an optimistic viewpoint on it, not unrealistic, but just being like, hey, where are the opportunities? Because that's where a lot of people shut down very early on. Is they're like, I can't do this, that's going to go wrong. So it's like all you're looking at is the obstacles. All you're looking at is at the thorn bushes. Whereas if you're like, oh, if I do this person could help me with this, and then I could do this thing over here, and then you start programming those neural processes to see the opportunities. And that's not saying the obstacles won't be there, but you're finding more opportunities because you're looking for them.
Hallelujah. I'll tell you one thing, and one thing he talked about in the podcast I was listening to last night, which I thought was really, really amazing. He said you cannot bargain with the universe in terms of what you want. You can't bargain. If you want this thing, then you must go all in. No matter what, you have to go all in and trust that the universe will provide it. Because the minute you bargain with it, it cuts you off. Because you think that somehow subconsciously that you're not going to get it, and that you're not trusting that it will come to you.
Wow.
So stop bargaining with the universe and go all in. And I was like, oh man, you're right. Like, you're so right. Because we oftentimes get so scared that we stop the blessings from coming in because we don't believe that is going to come to us. But you just have to go all in, right? Like, all of those decisions right now that you guys are thinking about that are stopping you, right? Because you don't want to go all in. That is the fear that's holding you back from getting what you want, because you cannot bargain with the universe.
That's a hell of a line, man. That kind of just
is that a book title yet? You can't bargain with the universe,
right?
But yeah, but it was, and I wish it's not for me, right? Like, that's what I heard yesterday. But it's so true. Like, every single time, and I was talking to a friend, Jimmy, this morning about it, right? Because he's all like, well, sometimes you need to make educated decisions on, what's going to be the best way forward and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, I will tell you one thing. I have never regretted a decision, because on the back end of it, I always learned something. And that ended up somehow revolutionizing and changing my entire perspective, and then in turn changing my life. So
wow,
I don't ever go back and go, I wish I wouldn't have done that. Why? Because now I know something that I wouldn't have had I not made the decision.
That's true.
And so I'm always going all in. I created a vision board this morning, because it was like, the reason why, and it was another guy, Steve something or another. I was listening to another podcast. It was also amazing. He was talking about be kind to your future self, right? Ooh. Do the things now so that when you look back on your past, you're thanking your earlier self for providing your future self those things, right? And I was like, oh, that's awesome.
If you could do another episode on vision boards, because I've seen podcasts and videos on vision boards, and they suck. They're not good. And so I think you could do one that's a lot more actionable. But yeah.
Sure. I mean, look, I went to Canva. They have vision boards. And if you text me here, I'll send you my vision board. But it's just basically like visualizing what it is that you want. I've always wanted to scuba dive. I've always wanted to scuba dive. And it's just been on my wants, bucket list thing for like years. And I was like, why am I not moving on that? What's stopping me? Nothing except for let's move. Life on Bourbon. Life on Bourbon was a project that's been sitting for years.
I remember.
Years. Yeah. And I was like, no, I said, I refuse to go another year without producing this project. I refuse. I'm just going to go, and people will hop on board, and people will want to be a part of it. I promise you, man. I put out posts on Facebook about it, and I was like, hey, we're still looking for help here, blah, 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 blah. They're coming out of the woodwork. They are coming out of the woodwork to want to help this project go. And I'm like, that's awesome. But it wouldn't have happened had I not gone all in.
And I love this comment in the live chat here. When moving forward on decisions, you either will win or will learn. So either way, you win. That's a great comment in the live chat there.
All right.
Yeah, heck yeah. Heck yeah. Like, and I'm glad it was Cannon who said it. Let me tell you a quick story about Cannon. So Cannon I met through I think it was a Facebook group. He was a San Antonio videographer, and I was just kind of telling him about my process and how I've been able to grow the business. Started mentoring him through it. And we found out, like, through going through this process, that there's things that fill him up that he was kind of ignoring because he felt like, oh, I've got to go and I've got to do this thing. And I said, well, don't worry about that. Like, if there's signs and there's a calling and this is a pull for you to do those things, then go and do those things. And he went all in, right? Like, the dude went all in. What did he do? He said, I'm going to stop being a videographer and an entrepreneur, right? Made the decision. And he said, Armando, I want to come and work for you. I want to come and help you do operations because I'm operationally, that's how I think. And he's like, and you don't have to pay me. I'm going to work for you for 3 months for free. And he worked 3 months for free, right? Why? Because he went all in. And it will test you. The universe will test you. It will test you over and over and over again to ask you, do you really want this thing? And if you go all in and you trust that it's going to happen, you're not bargaining with it, and it happens. And I know this happens over and over and over and over again. All of the successful people that you meet out there, they just trust that it's going to happen. They jump off the ledge. Steve Harvey talks about it too, that every successful person that you know out there jumped off the cliff without a net, without a parachute, and built the thing on the way down. And they just went all in. So that's the mistake a lot of people listening to this will not make the decision to do it for one reason or another. That will continue creating excuses as to why it won't work and why it's saturated and there's so many podcasts out there and who's going to listen to me and why does my opinion matter and nobody's going to watch it. And like, great. then continue sitting in that boat.
Whew.
And that's cool. You can. Nobody's going to force you. Nobody's going to force you out of it. However, if you want change, if you want this year to be different than the next year and the years past, then you've got to make the decision to do something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's something, and I mean, it's so funny, but just talking about, to go back to that podcast hosting bit a little bit. One of my favorite things about the podcast, and I know this sounds really silly, and it's almost like I want to say it in almost like a Mr. Rogers voice, but you talk to 3 strangers a day, and then you get done at the end of the day, and you go like, well, I made 3 new friends today. Isn't that special? It is a nice thing like that. Most people, when you get into it, you don't get to meet 3 new people a day, or whatever it is. You don't get to meet those people. You have to be intensely networking and out there to meet 3 new people a day.
Oh yeah.
It's, what's great about this too. And I if I sit down and actually really start to map out all of the benefits that you get from creating a podcast, I think it'd be a pretty extensive list. But one of the great benefits too is that I have people all over the country that I can meet up with at any moment. Right. In every major city in the United States and even in the world. Like, I know people through the podcast or a referral from the podcast where I can be like, hey, I'm going to be in your town. Let's have dinner. There was my friend who I met at a mastermind. He was doing an entrepreneur dinner in Miami. He was like, hey, invite anybody that you know. I ended up bringing like 5 people to the dinner, from Miami that I knew. And I was like, oh yeah, damn, I know all these people. And it was all people that had been on my podcast.
Oh yeah.
Right.
The mastermind that I run here in town, the Speakeasy Mastermind, that I'm a captain of, every single member of that, of our mastermind was on my podcast. Every single one of them. Like, I have friends for life.
I was going to say, your friend count on social media has to be through the roof.
Yeah, I don't have any more. I don't have any more room.
I think there's a cap on Facebook. It's not the MySpace days where you can just keep tilling up the score.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that right there, though, alone. I don't have any more room for friends on Facebook. That's an insane statement to make. Like, and y'all just said it so casually, like, that's insane.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm not, my impact that I'm trying to make here is to connect. You know what I mean? Because I think we're all experiencing this life together, and we're all on this spinning rock. You know what I mean? That's just like hurling through outer space. We're all experiencing the human condition. So let's connect. Let's get a little bit deeper and figure out why we're supposed to be here.
Yeah.
And I think we're starting to figure this as, I don't want to get too woo-woo on this call. But there's this growing movement of energy and what it means, and, and how we're all interconnected. And there's so many different things that we really don't understand. I was talking to this guy yesterday who I thought was really cool at this event, who was talking about aliens and how what our perception of an alien is could be totally out there, because we may not even be able to perceive what this alien could be, right? Like, it could be a light being that we can't even perceive because we can't even communicate with that, on a language level, so there's so much stuff that we just don't know. And that, there's this movement of how are we tapping into this infinite energy source and using that to get what we want, and manifesting the whole night. I mean, I totally not only believe it, but to just live it.
There was a conversation I had with a fellow actor years ago, and this was when I was just pulling down commercials and indie movies, and a whole bunch of stuff was going on for me. And she said something along the lines of she's like, I wish I could do what you could do, what you're doing. And I looked at her and I said, the only difference between us? And she's like, what, you're talented, or like if something like that, like a roll eyes sort of response. And I said, no, I said, I give myself permission. That's it. I was like, I watch how you second guess yourself and you hold yourself back and you tell yourself all the time that you can't do these things. And that's it. The moment you let go of that and you're like, I can do this, or at least I'm going to freaking try as hard as I possibly can, and we'll see what happens. But that was it. I was like, give yourself permission to succeed.
But everybody's just operating out of fear. It's just every day I see it. It's just fear mongering. I'm like, all right. I mean, just stay home then. Like,
there's also a flip side to that you give yourself permission to fail, right?
Also,
failure's also okay. It's okay.
Oh yeah, because I mean, gosh, as any actor knows, you're not booking every single audition you go to.
Right.
That's just. I mean, if there's somebody out that does that, more power to them. But you learn to handle rejection very casually, because you're like, okay, didn't get that one, on to the next one. And business, in sales, I don't sell to every single person I call. Some people are rude and they're dealing with something in their lives that I'm not a part of, and they took it out on me in a call. I'm like, okay, cool. And I just jump on the next call as quickly as possible to just get my head back in the game, because I'm like, I need to move forward. Like, I can't be focusing on this. I need to move forward.
And think about, there was somebody was like, oh, I met this actor. He was so rude. And I'm like, you know what? Give people a break, because you don't know what's going on in their personal life. You don't know, right? They could be going through the worst day, and you may have caught them on that day, right? They're not a bad guy. They're not a bad girl. They're just having a day. You know what I mean? So like, they're being human. So if you guys can think about those things too, like, try not to take things too personally. Maybe you're catching somebody on a bad day. Maybe it's, maybe it's one of the worst days of their life. Like, you just don't know what people are going through. And when you can think about that and you have that empathy, then things will roll off the back a lot easier.
I used to have this hang up in my office. It says there are 84,000, I forget how many, 84,000 seconds in a day, right? So if you had a bank account that you were getting $84,000 put into it a day, and somebody stole $10 out of it, would you spend the other $84,000 tracking down that $10? Or would you move forward? And so when somebody takes 30 seconds out of your day to be rude to you, and you're going to let that ruin the rest of your day and focus on that, it's like you're spending your resources in a way that doesn't benefit you at all.
Wow.
You
again.
Yes. 100%. Yes. I mean, look, you're watching the news, and everybody's allowing the news to,
oh my God,
dictate their life.
Yeah.
Stop it.
Yeah.
Stop. Unplug, dude. Like, unplug that shit. Like, dude, you cannot allow the news to dictate how you react to life. Like, it's telling you how to react, and you're going, oh, I'm outraged. Blah, 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 blah. Like, dude.
Well, a thing people have forgotten about the news, and I feel like we used to make fun of this more in mainstream media, the thing that people have forgotten about the news is, at the bare bones, it is a form of entertainment, because it exists to get views. So if they're not plugging things at you that are the most visceral things they can throw at you that are going to get all the views, they're not telling you about kids feeding ducks at the park. They're not telling you about this nonprofit that just helped their 35th person rehabilitate their lives. They're telling you, they're clickbaiting you. They're
every single time.
Yeah. And it's like,
breaking news. It's always breaking news. It's always a fucking breaking news. Sorry. It's always breaking. Everything's breaking.
Everything's breaking. I don't know how we're holding together.
Everything is breaking. Like, it's like, dude, no, it's not. It's not.
Or even the language they'll use. Nobody ever just disagrees with something. They slammed this person. They denounced this person. This very like heavy-handed language that's like, ooh, it's so mean and awful. And
be like, who's gonna watch this? And they're in literally meetings. I know, because we have meetings like that about content, right? What's the hook? Why are people going to watch? You got to create controversy. There's the hook is weak. The hook is weak, right? You're thinking about creating hooks all the time. And as noisy as it is right now, as noisy as it is, what do you have to do? You got to turn up the heat. You got to turn up the hook. And you got to create the clickbait. And you got to get the eyeballs.
Yeah.
The only way you're going to do that is if you have some sort of crisis. And everybody's just in crisis mode. Everything's crisis.
And they're getting worn out. Like, that's the thing, is like these people that I see posting, they just sound exhausted. And it's just like, you can only operate at that level for so long before it just wears you out.
Yeah.
Gotta stop. Gotta stop.
And there's so many better places to be putting our energy, even if it's just your immediate friends and family, reconnecting with them. Hey, what do you got going on? What do you need? What can I do with you or for you?
That's why I do love New Orleans, because it's like, dude, you got Mardi Gras, you got a crawfish boil, you got Jazz Fest, you got French Quarter Fest. Yeah. People are doing stuff. They're out there, they're experiencing life. They're living.
What was funny about me moving to New Orleans is I was real bad about texting. This was like pre smartphones. I was just texting all the time. And so I would get together with friends while they were having a crawfish boil or a backyard barbecue or whatever. And they're like, dude, put your phone away. Like, what are you doing? Because they're all just hanging out and talking. Like, very few people in that sphere you see like focusing on their phone. They're living. They're doing stuff with everybody else, and they're there. And it really kind of shook me out of that, where it's like, I'm going to put the phone away and I'm going to focus on these people in front of me.
Yeah.
Because that's what
I like that. And we can end on that note for sure. Yeah. So stay tuned. We're going to keep rolling out this content, specifically talking about our system, specifically talking about keeping it positive, changing the mindset, this limiting belief that we have that things are, that we can't do something, like, that's done. Like, if you're done living that way, then listen to this podcast, because that's what we're trying to promote here.
Hallelujah.
It's growth mindset shift, growing, expanding, abundance, all of those things, like that's where we need to be living. Why? Because, like, it's 2025. We're living in an amazing time, and everybody's complaining. Like, look around. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Like, look, Adrian's in Kansas City. I'm in New Orleans. Gideon's in Biloxi. No, yeah. Mobile. Sorry.
Mobile. Yeah.
Mobile.
Yeah.
Like, and we're doing a podcast live.
Yeah.
Like, that's insane.
Dude. I'm drinking sparkling water that I pulled out of my fridge. Like, when I was a kid, we didn't have sparkling water.
Yeah.
Like La Croix and Waterloo and stuff like that. I remember I poured that as I was coming in here, and I'm like, man, first world problems, like.
Oh, I wrote a song. It's called First World Blues.
I want to hear it.
It's like, my iPhone is cracked. Boom, 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 boom. Can't get no Wi-Fi. Boom, 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 boom. So it's just like all of this Stevie Ray Vaughan blues, but it's all first world problems.
Everybody's fantastic.
Yeah, I'll have to put it out to one of those other projects. But anyway, appreciate you guys being around. Adrian, Gideon, thanks for being on. Spaghetti on the Wall. Tune in next week. We'll have another episode. If you guys want us to cover something, let us know.